Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we continue our study of Sefer Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. We are in chapter 19, about to read the second half of chapter 19, starting from verse 16. Let's get right into it. In verse 16, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, says as follows. Atzla tapil tardema. I'm sorry, that's 15. I apologize. Let's hit 16. Shomer mitzvah, shomer nafsho. One who keeps the commandment, one who is careful to keep the commandments, shomer nafsho, he is careful to keep his soul. The mitzvah here seems to be referring to what we traditionally translate mitzvah to mean, the commandment of God. And then Boze dirachav yamus. There are several ways to understand this phrase. Boze dirachav mean one who is abusive of his ways, yamus, will be led to death. Now, what does it mean by his ways? So this could be a parallel to the first half, meaning if you keep the mitzvah of God, then you are guarding yourself. You are guarding your own soul and your own well-being, and thus lead to life. And if you are bozed dirachav, his ways with a capital H, meaning God's ways, and you don't heed them, and you don't pay attention to them, and thus you abuse them, yamos, that you're led to death. I really like the Mitzudos understanding of this verse, and for some reason, this second half of this chapter, the Mitzudos, I think outshines the other traditional commentaries, and he understands this to be the flip end. In other words, what I mean is that if you keep God's ways, then you are guarding yourself. But bozed dirachav, if you are heedless of his ways with a small h, meaning your own ways, the person's own ways, a person who does not heed his own path, he doesn't take seriously the path upon which his own life is set, Yamos will be led to death. We all have paths in life, and many of us live our entire lives running away from the task that is obviously presented to us. We have a path, we have a way, and we are boza, we abuse it. That would be another way of understanding verse 16. Verse 17, Malve Adonai chonein dal, one who has mercy and kindness and grace towards an impoverished person. This is impoverished whether it's financially or whether it's in any way a person who's missing something. That person is like lending money to God, so to speak. What is that? Because when you lend God something, obviously he repays. Gemulo, and that which he repays, mishalem lo, he will repay him. In other words, the repayment will come back. If you have mercy on he who is poor, on he who is destitute, upon he who is suffering, it's like you're loaning God money, and don't worry, he will definitely repay that loan. Yaser bincha ki yesh tikva, this is verse 18. And now there's various ways to translate this. One would be, Yaser, give discipline to your child while there is still hope. Now, that is some of the translations. However, the Mitzudos, again, I'm drawing upon him. He has very he's always beautiful as a commentary, of course, but in this chapter it just particularly seems to hit everything spot on, hits home runs with every verse here. So ki yesh tikva, not while there is hope, is because there is hope, meaning if you translate it as while, so then you would think, well, discipline him and teach him or her when there is hope, but when there's no more hope, forget it, give up. But he's saying no, always do it because there is always hope. Because there is hope. That is why, in other words, even if it appears to you to be hopeless, don't worry. There is always hope. Always, Yaser Bincha, always be available to give discipline when appropriate. Ve'el hamiso al tisan nafshecha. And do not allow yourself, do not allow your soul, your heart to let him die. In other words, to let him go down a destructive path. So never ever don't set your heart on his destruction is one way of translating this. In other words, don't think, well, he's gone, it's done, it's over, I don't have to, it's not worth it anymore. Never give up on your child. Gidol chema no se onesh. There's various ways to read this. I'm going to read the Zakuri and Aktiv. Again, I am going to use Mitsudos here on how to understand this verse. And he understands it as follows. Gidol chema, one who has a lot of anger, no se onesh, will always carry punishment. He will always get himself into trouble. If you act out of anger, you will always get yourself into trouble and do bad things. Ki im tatzil, even if you try to save someone from someone else's wrath, viod tosif, that person who is angry will get even angrier. So this is an observation of human behavior. Many of the Proverbs are observations of human behavior, and many are advice. This is an observation. If a person is an angry person and they're taking out their anger on someone, and you stick up for the person who is being abused, that person will then get even angrier and angrier and take it out on you. Unfortunately, this is a truth that most of us have seen and are very familiar with. Verse 20 is a theme which we have seen repeatedly over and over again, stated in various ways throughout the book of Proverbs. Shema Eitzah, listen, this is advice. Listen to someone when they give you advice. Be humble enough to listen to others, v'kabel musar, and accept rebuke. If someone tells you did something wrong, accept it. Don't get insulted. Don't get angry. L'man techkam b'achisacha, in order that you should be wise in the end. The only way to gain knowledge is to accept criticism from others. Rabos machshavos b'levish. And how does one accept this rebuke? How does one realize this? One does that by realizing their humility before God, because we all have plans, we all have ideas, we all have lofty dreams, we all have all kinds of patterns of thought that we think are true. We think this is right, we think that's right, we think I'm right, I know this, I know that. But Batsas Adonai Takum, ultimately, it's only the knowledge of God that's takum, that it lasts forever. That will be successful in the end. And because we do not know that Eitzah, we do not know, there's no way for us to know God's plan. So therefore we should be humble and be ready to listen to advice and to listen to rebuke and to change our ways when appropriate. And don't be so stuck in our ways. Remember our humility before God. Tavas Adam Chasto. This is verse 22. This is really beautiful. And here I'm going to go again with Mitsudos. Rashi also explains it very similarly. That people desire someone, people like to be near someone, people like to be close to someone, chasto, because of his chesed, because of his kindness. People like to come close to someone who is a kind person, who is a good person. Vitov rush. However, right, if you're a wealthy man and you make promises and don't keep them, right, and you try to pretend you're kind, right, but you don't actually pull through, you don't actually give, you don't actually act kind, that's a liar. Then tov rush meish gazav. However, even though it's true that a kind person draws people towards themselves, it's a rush, a poor person who has much less to offer is better than a person who lies. Right? So the highest level would be someone who has what to give and gives it, and people are drawn to him. But if you try to draw people to you with lies, it would be better that he didn't make those false promises in the first place. There's various translations, but again, I'm going with Rashi and Mitsudos, which really hit the nail on the head, spot on with the understanding of this verse. Yiras Adonai l'chaim, this is verse 23, one who fears God. And this is saying, is on a more of a a simpler level, a person who fears God, who realizes that there's God in this world, and therefore he or she behaves properly. L'chaim, that is a path towards life. V'saveya yolin, and that kind of person will sleep well. They will sleep in a satisfactory way because they will know that they're on the right path. Bal yipaked ra, and bad things will be withheld, will not happen to them. Toman otzel yodo bitzalochas, a lazy person buries his hand in the plate. Here you have to imagine the way they used to eat in those days. Where you have a big bowl of food in the middle, and everyone uses their hands and takes food from the bowl, right? A lazy guy plops his hand in the bowl but never bothers to grab. So gamel pio lo yishivena. Eventually, when he brings his hand out, he'll have no food in it because all the food will be gone. Everyone else will have eaten it. It's saying a lazy person, really, if you imagine the image, who starts a project, never finishes it, who begins an endeavor, a business, a task, but never pulls it off. And by the time he gets up the energy to move forward, it's too late. It's over. The opportunity is gone. Late takeh upesi yarim. This is verse 25. Sometimes a fool can only learn through takeh, through strikes. It could mean literally striking them, but really it means through a threat of punishment. When one sees the negative consequences of their actions, when you point out to them what the result is going to be, then the result will be suffering. That's sometimes the only way a fool can learn, is to see, well, if I go down that road, I will suffer, and then maybe they will choose to go away. However, an understanding person, a person of wisdom, shouldn't need that, should only be led in the right direction, because it's the right direction. And that's the second half of the verse. One who gives reproof to one who understands, right? He will be able to accept that. In his or her humility, he will accept and understand the truth. Yavin das, he will know knowledge. Knowledge alone will lead him in the right way. This next verse 26 is an observation, but also an implicit or not so implicit piece of advice. One who is mishaded of, a person who takes advantage of his father, yavriach aim, he is chasing away his mother, or one who chases away his mother, that kind of son, bain, is a bain mevish umachpir. That is a son who is a shame to his father, and he frightens his mother away. That kind of son, when their parents are old and they need their child the most, this person who has spent his life taking advantage of them, not treating them with respect, chasing his mother out, that kind of person, that kind of son is the kind of son who will bring ultimate shame and suffering to his parents, especially in the end of their days. That's the image that this verse is putting out there. Verse 27, Chadal beni lishmoa musar, and there's various ways of understanding this one. There's two ways that you can understand this. One path is Chadal beni lishmoa musar, which means if you, my son, if you withhold from listening to reproof, if you stop listening to, then lishgos be'imei das, then you will make a mistake. You will make a mistake when it comes to listening to knowledge. If you don't listen to others and you don't have the humility to listen to other people when they correct your ways and they give you a reproof, then lishgos, you will continue to make mistakes. Even when you hear words of knowledge, you will never understand them properly. You will not learn the right lessons. That's one. Another one is way of understanding is that it's advice. It's not saying if, it's not an observation, but rather it's a command, and it's saying don't listen to bad advice. Right? Chadal beni lishmoa musar. My son, stop listening to musar. If they are the kinds of musar that are lishgos me'emrei das, if that is the kind of musar that leads to a mistaken knowledge of words of knowledge. In other words, don't listen to bad. I just told you how important it is to listen to advice, but be careful. Now, if you understand it the second way I just said it, then the next verse 28 is a following verse, is connected, and it's telling you, well, how do you know what's good knowledge and what's bad knowledge? How do I know what to listen to and what not to listen to? And then the second verse 28 is Eid b'liyal yolitz mishpat, a useless, a worthless piece of nothing aid, witness. Witness here means not necessarily a witness in court, but anyone who claims to say something that he knows. Yolitz mishpat. That's the kind of person who scoffs at, who treats justice with cynicism. That's how you know which kind of musar to listen to. When somebody comes and, nobody did, a person speaking cynically, they're all a bunch of useless thing. A person that treats things cynically, That's the kind of advice, that doesn't take justice seriously. That's the kind of advice to stay away from. Ufi rishoim yivala oven. The mouth of a rasha, the mouth of an evil person, right? Yivala oven is constantly hiding, or a sin is hiding bad things. In other words, he's advising you to do bad things, but he's trying to dress it up in a way as a good thing. He's trying to make pretend when he tells you that this is a good thing, but really, so that's how you know what's bad. If you understand 27 not as a command, but rather it's saying if you don't listen to Musar, then you will make a mistake, then 28 might have a different meaning. Then 28, instead of being connected in the way of giving you advice of how to tell what's good advice and what's bad advice, because in this reading, the verse 27 is telling you that you should not stop listening to Musar, then this one is telling you the flip side of that, which is a fool, a scoffer, a cynical person is the kind of person, right, is an Eid Belial. He is a useless, worthless witness, and he is the kind of person who is constantly trying to conceal the true malicious intent in his words. Nachonu, verse 29, the last verse of this chapter. Nachonu laleitzim shifatim. What is set aside? What is in store for the lates, for the cynic? Shifatim. It is judgment, right? In other words, his cynicism is going to come back to haunt him. Umahalumos legev kesilim, and mahalumos are literally blows or punches, or mahalumos are one person in a fight, in a physical fight, gives to the other, blows, punches, kicks, etc. Mahalumos is the legev kesilim, is what's going to end up on the back of fools. In other words, fools meaning he who does not listen to others, he who is not humble enough to learn the lessons that he is being taught. And so that concludes this chapter 19, again, full of incredible wisdom, incredible advice. I thank you for studying chapter 19 together with me. I look forward to studying chapter 20, and of course the remainder of this wonderful, wonderful, incredible book of wisdom. Have a wonderful, beautiful day.